Dean Ambrose Shocking Returns and helps Roman Reigns win Money in the Bank 2025. History just flipped on its head. Roman Reigns is back at Money in the Bank 2025, and he didn't come alone. But it's not what you think. Jon Moxley didn't just return. He signed a new Money in the Bank contract. After months of silence and speculation, the unthinkable happened. Roman Reigns made his WWE return during the closing moments of the Money in the Bank main event. Just as Seth Rollins was about to secure the win against Bron Breakker, the lights went out. And when they came back on, Jon Moxley was already in the ring. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He snapped. Steel chair to Rollins. DDT to Bron. The match was thrown into chaos as Moxley stood over both men, breathing like a man possessed. Then Roman's music hit. The arena came unglued. Reigns walked down the ramp in street clothes, calm, calculated, briefcase in hand. He didn't even break stride. He entered the ring, stared Moxley down, and then handed him the briefcase. No words. No alliance announcement. Just two men who knew exactly what they were doing. And then the twist, Moxley cashed in. On Seth Rollins. In one of the most stunning betrayals in recent memory, Moxley pinned Rollins clean, 1-2-3, and became the new undisputed champion, without a contract, without warning, and without ever saying a word. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or riot. It was part Shield, part Revolution, and 100% personal. The post-show reaction was immediate and wild. Rumors flew that Moxley signed a short-term WWE deal only hours before the show. Some say it was Roman's condition for returning. Others believe it's the beginning of a full-blown invasion angle. Seth Rollins? Completely blindsided. Cameras caught him post-match shoving officials and refusing medical attention. WWE.com has yet to confirm his condition. Meanwhile, backstage footage leaked of Roman and Moxley walking out of the arena together, flanked by security, refusing all interviews. This wasn't a Shield reunion. This was a hostile takeover. And now, the entire WWE landscape is in free fall. Is Moxley officially back in WWE, or just passing through to make a statement? Was this all orchestrated by Reigns as revenge against Rollins and Heyman's new regime? And most importantly, what happens now that Jon Moxley is holding the company's top title with no allegiance to anyone? SummerSlam just turned into an all-out war zone. The power has shifted. The rules are gone. And the Shield? It's not reuniting. It's rebelling. Hit that like button, drop your theories in the comments, and subscribe now, because this isn't just a return. It's a reckoning. The crowd was electric. The kind of energy you feel in your spine, not your ears. Chicago was on fire. Money in the Bank 2025 had already delivered jaw-dropping moments, but everyone knew the main event was the centerpiece, Seth Rollins. Bron Breakker. A golden briefcase hanging like a loaded gun over the ring. The company's top prize within reach, but not yet claimed. Then came the climb. Seth Rollins, battle-worn and furious, dragging his broken body rung by rung toward destiny. Bron was down. Barely conscious. The audience could taste it. Seth was seconds away from securing the briefcase that would guarantee him a future title shot and cement his run as WWE's face. His fingertips brushed the leather. That's when the lights died. Full blackout. And the world changed. There was no music. No video. Just the low, vibrating hum of 20,000 people holding their breath at the same time. For a few agonizing seconds, the arena was suspended in absolute darkness. And then, crack. A steel chair. Echoing like a gunshot. The lights snapped back on, and in the ring stood Jon Moxley. No smirk. No salute. Not a word. Just fury. Before anyone could register what was happening, he brought the chair down again, straight into Rollins' ribs. Then a DDT to Bron Breakker that folded the rising star like origami. Gasps turned to roars. Shock became hysteria. Moxley didn't explain. He didn't have to. His presence was a declaration, he wasn't back. He was here to burn it down. Then, just when you thought it couldn't go any further off the rails, Roman Reigns' music hit. The roof didn't blow off. It disintegrated. But what followed wasn't the usual Roman entrance. He didn't emerge in full gear. No pyro. No cocky swagger. Roman Reigns walked down the ramp in black jeans and a hoodie. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to finish something. In his hand? The Money in the Bank briefcase. He didn't run. He didn't pause. He entered the ring, locked eyes with Moxley for a moment that felt like an hour, and handed it to him. No words. No signals. Just an act. Then Moxley did what no one expected. He cashed in. With Rollins barely conscious and Bron Breakker crumpled, Moxley made it official. The ref, unsure but bound by rules, signaled the start of a new match. Within seconds, Moxley dragged Seth's body to the center, lifted him up, paradigm shift. 1, 2, 3. Clean. No interference. No screwjob. Just Jon Moxley pinning Seth Rollins dead center in a WWE ring, wearing no WWE gear, with no contract the public knew about. And just like that, the entire WWE power structure folded in on itself. This wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't a Shield reunion. It was a war declaration. Jon Moxley didn't walk back through WWE's doors with open arms. He kicked them in and took the top title without permission. And Roman? He vanished into the night with him. No post-match speech. No gloating. Just cold silence. The internet exploded within seconds. Is Moxley back in WWE? Was this planned by Roman? Is the Shield turning heel again? Theories flooded social media. Every wrestling news site scrambled to confirm details, no one knew anything. All WWE.com said was, Jon Moxley is the new undisputed champion. No contract details. No press conference. No storyline recaps. And Rollins? He was seen backstage shoving referees and screaming at officials, refusing any medical treatment. Word is, he believed he'd been double-crossed by both men, former brothers who didn't just return, they took everything from him. This wasn't a storyline. This felt personal. And that's what makes this the most shocking ending to a WWE pay-per-view in years. Not because a surprise return happened, but because the rules were shattered. Because the silence was louder than any catchphrase. Because Jon Moxley, the man WWE lost to AEW years ago, came back not to reunite, but to revolt. What happens next? That's the story we're telling in this video. But first, let's rewind. Because to understand why this happened, you need to see everything that led to it. History didn't just repeat itself. It rewrote the rules. Jon Moxley, once exiled from WWE and considered a lost chapter, returned unannounced at Money in the Bank 2025. Not as a cameo. Not as a nostalgia act. As a nuclear event. Within a 10-minute window, WWE's most stable storyline was turned upside down. Seth Rollins lost everything. Roman Reigns returned without warning. And the Money in the Bank briefcase became a live weapon handed from one ex-Shield member to another like a baton in a war relay. The match? Officially a triple threat. The outcome? Undisputed. Jon Moxley stood over Seth Rollins with the championship high above his head and not a single WWE official in sight to explain how it even happened. This was not an angle built over weeks of backstage promos or surprise video packages. It wasn't teased on social media, or hinted at by dirt sheets. No one predicted this. No leaks. No spoilers. Because no one expected Jon Moxley to even be in the country, let alone in a WWE ring. What happened Sunday night wasn't just unexpected. It was surgical. It was cold. It was a hit job on the entire WWE status quo. The Shield didn't return. That would have been too easy. Instead, two-thirds of the most dominant faction in modern WWE history tore the roof off a pay-per-view and left the company scrambling for answers. It all started when the Money in the Bank ladder match looked like it was wrapping up exactly as scripted. Seth Rollins, the workhorse, the architect, the face of Triple H's regime, was on his way to victory. Bron Breakker had been the wild card, a rising star with nothing to lose. The two clashed, bruised, and battered each other until it seemed Rollins had finally done it. The camera angle tightened. Rollins stretched his arm toward the briefcase. Then, blackout. For 5 seconds, the world held its breath. When the lights came back up, Jon Moxley was in the ring like a ghost. No intro. No warning. Just a chair and a mission. What followed was a moment that left the audience questioning whether they were watching a wrestling show or witnessing a coup. Rollins went down from a steel chair to the ribs. Bron Breakker followed with a DDT that shook the canvas. Moxley said nothing. There was no speech, no drama. Just carnage. And then, Roman Reigns returned, not in glory, not in bloodline regalia, but in civilian clothes, calm, clinical, with the briefcase in hand. He walked to the ring. The crowd chanted his name and screamed for clarity. He said nothing. Instead, he climbed through the ropes, stared at Moxley, and extended the briefcase like a gift. Moxley took it. Cash in. Ref rings the bell. Moxley, the man without a contract, without an entrance, without a storyline, became the undisputed champion after planting Rollins face first in the canvas. 3 seconds. That's all it took to obliterate nearly a year's worth of title build-up. The most baffling part? No one knows if this was sanctioned. WWE executives have not issued a formal statement. No details on Moxley's contract status have been confirmed. According to multiple sources, production staff had no prior notice. Commentators weren't given a rundown. It was as real as wrestling gets. In less than 10 minutes, two men who weren't even scheduled to appear pulled off the biggest theft of power in recent wrestling history. This wasn't just a twist. This was a declaration. Rollins was seen after the broadcast, storming backstage, screaming at officials. He refused interviews, declined medical evaluation, and reportedly left the arena without speaking to anyone. His fury, it seems, is not just part of the act. And that raises a bigger question: was this premeditated by Roman Reigns? All signs point to yes. Roman's return was always inevitable. But no one imagined this would be the context. By walking out not as a champion but as an accomplice, he flipped the narrative. For the past 2 years, Reigns had dominated as the tribal chief. Now, he's something even more dangerous, a free agent with influence. The Roman Empire didn't rise again. It infiltrated from within. As for Moxley? This wasn't Dean Ambrose. This wasn't a comedic lunatic fringe return. This was calculated violence. Moxley didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Because when you burn bridges, you don't talk about it. You light the match and walk away. Online reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag Moxley returns, hashtag Roman hands it off, hashtag Shield reckoning. Wrestling fans divided into camps, some calling it the greatest twist since the original Shield betrayal in 2014, others furious at the lack of explanation. And yet, no one looked away. Within 1 hour of the event ending, the clip of Moxley's return had 14 million views across WWE's digital platforms. Theories erupted. Some claimed this was a one-night deal brokered by Reigns himself. Others speculated this was the start of a larger invasion angle that could open the forbidden door between WWE and AEW. No one could agree on the facts. Everyone agreed on one thing: it changed everything. And here's the strange truth: the silence might have been the loudest part. In an industry built on promos, storylines, and weeks of hype, the most iconic moment of 2025 happened without a single line of dialogue. Two men. One briefcase. One message. Take everything. Was it revenge for past betrayals? A long-game assault on Paul Heyman's vision? An indictment of the current WWE landscape? That's what we're going to explore next. Because if you thought this was just a shocking return, you're missing the bigger picture. This wasn't nostalgia. This wasn't redemption. This was a reckoning. To understand what happened at Money in the Bank 2025, you have to rewind the clock, not just months, but years. What took place in that ring wasn't an isolated act. It was the culmination of personal vendettas, business shifts, burned bridges, and backstage whispers no one wanted to speak aloud. This wasn't the return of Jon Moxley. It was the return of the consequences. Let's start with the man who never really left, Seth Rollins. For the last year, Rollins has been carrying the flagship of WWE on his back. After the bloodline dissolved and Roman Reigns took a sabbatical following his WrestleMania 40 defeat, Rollins stepped into the vacuum. He was the workhorse, the constant. Night after night, city after city, he delivered in-ring classics and anchored the main event scene. But make no mistake, his rise didn't come without controversy. When Paul Heyman aligned himself with Rollins behind the scenes, it caused a seismic rift. Sources say Rollins wasn't just being positioned as the top face, he was being handed the keys to the kingdom. A new faction emerged behind him. Younger talent. A more controlled locker room. Rollins wasn't just leading storylines, he was shaping policy. This didn't sit well with everyone. Especially not Roman Reigns. Roman's hiatus was quiet. He didn't give interviews. WWE never officially stripped him of his titles, he vacated them under ambiguous circumstances. Personal time, they called it. Insiders claimed otherwise. One source said Reigns left over creative differences. Another said he was negotiating a limited return, under one condition: full autonomy. 4 months, nothing happened. No appearances. No tweets. No leaks. But the silence was strategic. Because while Rollins built his empire, Reigns was watching it crumble from the shadows. Then there's the real wild card, Jon Moxley. Since leaving WWE in 2019, Moxley had made a name for himself as AEW's violent poet. A man who bled for the crowd and brawled in ways WWE had long sanitized. He was the beating heart of AEW's locker room, a symbol of rebellion, unpredictability, and raw intensity. And yet, over the past 6 months, Moxley had gone quiet. AEW removed him from its main event picture. He was on sabbatical, allegedly recovering from nagging injuries. The company said he needed time to reset. Fans believed it. But those close to the situation tell a different story. Moxley had reportedly been frustrated with the direction of AEW's storytelling. He wanted something deeper. More dangerous. Something that meant something. He wanted blood, not bells. And apparently, Reigns knew that. According to sources who've worked backstage across both promotions, conversations began informally, weeks before MITB. Reigns allegedly made contact with Moxley through mutual friends, possibly agents. There's no proof. No paper trail. But the timing lines up. AEW insiders say Moxley was given a short-term out clause in his contract. WWE lawyers knew the window. It was brief. Just wide enough to make something insane happen, if they had the nerve. Which brings us to MITB. WWE had everything riding on this card. The summer arc needed a spark. The locker room morale was shifting. Triple H wanted a new generation to break through. The card was stacked with rising stars, but no one had captured the audience's obsession like the Days of the Shield, or the Bloodline Saga. MITB 2025 was built around Rollins and Breakker, a clash of generations. The architect versus the animal. Everything was pointing toward Rollins winning the briefcase, teasing a long summer storyline as the ultimate company man. But the company didn't account for one thing: Roman Reigns isn't a company man anymore. Reigns was never interested in just returning. He wanted control. Influence. Impact. What better way to get it than to hijack the most valuable asset in WWE, the briefcase, and hand it to the one man everyone thought would never come back? The moment Roman walked out with that briefcase, it was clear, this wasn't about nostalgia. It wasn't about mending fences. It was about weaponizing history. And no one has more history than the Shield. 10 years ago, the Shield redefined faction dominance. 3 men, Rollins, Reigns, Ambrose, united by destruction. They ran through the roster, obliterated legends, and left carnage wherever they went. Then came betrayal. Rollins was the first to turn. He sold out to the Authority in 2014, smashing Reigns and Ambrose with a steel chair heard around the world. That betrayal split the Shield for years. It defined character arcs. It created new legacies. But it never settled the debt. Over the years, the 3 men would occasionally cross paths. There were forced reunions. Half-hearted nods to the past. But the tension always returned. Because betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from family. Now, 10 years later, the knife has come full circle. Moxley and Reigns didn't just attack Rollins physically, they attacked him structurally. They exposed the machinery around him. They reminded the world that while Rollins built his throne on loyalty and legacy, he was the first to burn it down. And that may be the real reason behind all this. Revenge. Silent. Calculated. Surgical revenge. There's one last piece to this puzzle: timing. Everything about this plan relied on perfect timing. The contract loophole. The match status. The lighting crew. The referee in the ring. Every second mattered. This wasn't thrown together in a week. This was mapped. And yet, it still felt like chaos. That's what makes it so compelling. This wasn't the Shield reuniting. This was them weaponizing the very myth of the Shield to rip open a hole in WWE's carefully constructed present. Reigns didn't return to fight. He returned to disrupt. Moxley didn't come back for redemption. He came back to steal everything. Rollins? He wasn't the champion walking in. But he was the embodiment of the WWE system. And that's exactly why he was the target. So now the pieces are on the board. The moves have been made. And as we step into the next chapter of this story, one thing is crystal clear: this wasn't a return. It was a takedown. And the road to MITB? It was never about the ladder. It was always about who controlled the climb. Money in the Bank 2025 was supposed to be a showcase. A torch-passing moment between a living legend and a next-generation force. Seth Rollins vs. Bron Breakker was billed as a collision of eras: grit versus explosiveness, mind games versus muscle. It delivered all of that. Until it became something else entirely. This wasn't just a match. It became a trapdoor into chaos. Let's break it down from bell to blackout. The arena was loud before the bell rang. Chicago is always a wrestling city, and tonight they were red hot. Rollins entered first, draped in gold and soaked in ego. The fans sang his theme louder than the PA system. He smiled, but there was an edge to him. This wasn't the over-the-top jester persona he sometimes leans into. This Seth was serious. Sharp. Focused. Then came Bron. No wasted motion. No pandering. Breakker walked to the ring like a man who already believed the match was his. Built like a cannonball and moving like a predator, he was everything WWE's future is being shaped around. Explosive. Marketable. Unapologetically dangerous. The bell rang. And right away, the pace was war. First 5 minutes, all athleticism. Rollins played smart, using Bron's aggression against him. Drop toeholds into turnbuckles. Low super kicks. Quick roll-ups. He tried to wear Bron down early. But Bron wasn't here for mat work. He was here to hurt Seth. At the 6-minute mark, Breakker leveled Rollins with a running power slam that shook the mat. Then he hit a standing moonsault, an absurd move for a man of his size, and nearly got the 3 count. The crowd popped hard. Rollins rolled outside, regrouping. This is where things turned psychological. Rollins began baiting Breakker. Ducking out, forcing the chase, luring Bron into high-risk errors. It worked. Bron charged Rollins at ringside and ended up slamming shoulder first into the steel steps. From that point on, Seth went to work like a surgeon, targeting the shoulder with stomps, arm wrenches, and rope-assisted submissions. It became brutal. 10 minutes in, Rollins hit a frog splash from the top rope directly onto Breakker's arm. He didn't even cover him. He just stood there, shaking his head, grinning, mouthing the words, "You're not ready." Bron gritted his teeth and roared back. Momentum swung hard. At 12 minutes, Breakker exploded. A spinebuster out of nowhere flipped the rhythm. He followed with a release German suplex that sent Rollins sprawling across the ring like a rag doll. The audience came alive again. 15-minute mark, chaos. Bron went for a Frankensteiner. Rollins caught him midair, countered into a buckle bomb, then sprinted off the ropes, super kick. Crowd surging. He lifted Bron for a Falcon Arrow. Nailed it. 2 count. Audible groans from the fans. Rollins went to the apron, looked up at the briefcase hanging above, then to the turnbuckle. He climbed. A massive pop. Top rope Phoenix splash attempt, Bron moved. Rollins crashed. Bron roared to his feet. Military press into a power slam, spiked Rollins. Another 2 count. Fans chanting, "This is awesome." Rollins was motionless for a beat. The referee checked him. This should have been the story. The classic clash of grit versus might, veteran guile versus youthful rage. But the match wasn't finished with drama yet. At 20 minutes in, both men were down. Breakker had just speared Rollins through the ropes to the outside, and both landed hard. The ref started the count. That's when the lights cut out. It was instantaneous. 1 second, arena screaming. The next, pitch black. No sound, no music, just gasps. 5 seconds passed. It felt like 20. Lights up. Jon Moxley in the ring. Steel chair in hand. Breathing like he'd just run through the crowd. Not a drop of emotion on his face. Before anyone could make sense of it, Moxley drove the chair into Rollins' midsection with a crack that echoed through the arena. Rollins folded. Bron tried to rise, he didn't get far. Moxley dropped the chair, grabbed Breakker by the head, and drove him into the mat with a paradigm shift. The move was stiff, clean, and deliberate. Not overacted. Just clinical. The crowd roared in disbelief. Commentators fell silent. No one knew what to say. Moxley looked around the arena like a man waking up in a memory. Then stood still. The match, officially, was in limbo. Then Roman's music hit. And somehow, it got louder. This wasn't a triumphant return theme. No fireworks. No slow zoom on the stage. Roman Reigns appeared at the top of the ramp in black jeans, hoodie, and sneakers. In his hand, the Money in the Bank briefcase. He didn't say anything. He didn't acknowledge the camera. He just walked. Past the pyro deck. Past the timekeeper. Into the ring. He and Moxley stood face to face for a long moment. The air was thick with meaning. Then, Roman handed him the briefcase. Just like that. No announcement. No "I'm cashing in" speech. No drama. Moxley took the case. The referee hesitated, but rang the bell. The match was no longer Rollins versus Breakker. It was Moxley versus whoever was breathing. Bron Breakker was still down. Rollins, barely upright, tried to fight. It didn't matter. Moxley hit him with a DDT so tight it looked like a drill pressing into the earth. 1, 2, 3. The bell rang. And just like that, Jon Moxley, unannounced, unsanctioned, unapologetic, became undisputed champion. The crowd was stunned. Not silent. Not cheering. Just stunned. Moxley stood over the bodies. Roman nodded once. Then left. They didn't pose together. They didn't speak. No shield fist bump. Just execution. A match that began as the torch passing of the summer ended in an act of wrestling terrorism. Not a heel turn. Not a face pop. Just raw, unfiltered disruption. WWE didn't just lose control of its story. It lost control of its future. And now, with Moxley holding the gold and Roman playing ghostwriter to the entire script, the entire landscape has fractured. Because now we know what happens when the match ends, but the war begins. He didn't walk out to music. He didn't point at the crowd or shout "I'm back." Jon Moxley re-entered WWE with no words, no fanfare, and no permission. He didn't just return. He invaded. The moment the lights came back on at Money in the Bank, and Moxley was standing there, chair in hand, staring through Seth Rollins like he didn't even recognize him, that's when it became clear. This wasn't about nostalgia. This wasn't about the Shield. This wasn't even about the title. It was personal. Wrestling returns usually come with theater, lights, lasers, signature poses. But not this one. This return was raw. Dirty. Angry. It wasn't WWE produced. It felt unscripted, like a man had broken into a locked house he once called home, and now he was tearing out the floors. No Titantron. No Ambrose Asylum graphics. Moxley didn't bring anything back with him from the past. He brought his present, violence. And it wasn't the kind of violence WWE packages with taglines and highlight reels. It was the kind that makes you uncomfortable. The kind that doesn't sell merch. The kind that says, "I'm here because I hate everything you've become." He didn't walk into the ring with a grin. He walked into a crime scene he was about to create. The steel chair shot to Rollins' ribs was stiff. Not cinematic. Not dramatic. It was surgical. Mechanical. Like he'd been waiting to do it for years. No hesitation. No wind-up. Just intent. Then came the DDT to Bron Breakker. Fast. Precise. No hesitation. No posturing. He looked down at the man WWE was pushing as its next big thing and planted him into the mat like it was a reflex. There was no glance to the crowd. No look to the camera. Because Moxley didn't care about moments. He cared about messages. And the message was clear: I can come back whenever I want. And no one can stop me. It wasn't the kind of return that gets promoted on Raw the next night with a celebratory highlight package. It was the kind that makes the production truck panic. The kind that makes executives reach for their phones, not their scripts. What made it even more surreal was Moxley's silence. He didn't speak a word. Not one. That silence said more than any promo could have. Because when Moxley left WWE in 2019, he left with venom. He buried the company in interviews. Called out the creative process. Called the system broken. He wasn't shy about his hatred for how things worked behind the scenes. So for him to show up in 2025, not to shake hands, not to make amends, but to destroy, meant everything. This was not a comeback. It was a correction. And then there's the stare down with Roman Reigns. It lasted maybe 7 seconds. No audio. No expression. But the tension in that ring could have shattered concrete. These two men had once been brothers in arms. Then adversaries. Then shadows in each other's legacies. For years, their stories were written without each other. Different companies. Different styles. Different philosophies. But that night, they were aligned. No words. Just an exchange, the briefcase, from Roman to Moxley. No smile. No nod. No confirmation. Just understanding. Moxley didn't ask for permission. Roman didn't explain his actions. The briefcase was handed off like contraband between two men who already knew the consequences. And then Moxley cashed in. Not because he needed the title. Not because he wanted validation. But because he could. Because Rollins had built his house on loyalty, only to realize loyalty doesn't protect you from ghosts. Because Bron Breakker was supposed to represent the future, and Moxley just showed everyone the future bleeds too. After the 3 count, Moxley stood over the carnage with no celebration. He didn't raise the title. He didn't gloat. He just stared down at what he'd done. A man possessed, but in full control. If this had been any other superstar, we'd be calling it a heel turn. But Moxley doesn't operate on that axis. He's not heel. He's not face. He's gravity. And when he enters the room, things fall apart. Backstage sources say Moxley refused all press interviews. WWE staff reportedly weren't briefed on his appearance. The internal Slack channels went quiet. According to one staffer, nobody knew what the hell was going on. It felt like we were hijacked. Theories began immediately. Some said it was a one-time deal. A creative masterstroke by Triple H. Others claim it was something Roman Reigns orchestrated himself, possibly even outside of corporate oversight. But one thing's for sure, Jon Moxley did not walk through the curtain to play nice. He came back to make a statement. And that statement was this: the rules don't apply to me. It was a shot across the bow to every suit in Stamford. A direct challenge to the safe, sanitized image WWE has carefully curated over the last 5 years. Moxley didn't just break the fourth wall. He tore it down and threw it at the commentary table. This is what made his return different. Bigger than a surprise. Bigger than a moment. It was an act of defiance. Of rebellion. And it raises one unavoidable question: is Moxley here to stay? Because if he is, then every champion, every authority figure, every storyline just got rewritten. If he isn't? Then he just reminded the world that the past is never really gone. It just waits for the right moment to punch a hole in the present. Either way, the war has already started. And it's silent. Violent. Relentless. Roman Reigns didn't come back as the tribal chief. He didn't wear the gold. He didn't command the Usos or bark orders to Solo. He didn't hold the title, stand on the announce table, or deliver a victory speech. He didn't even speak. He returned to Money in the Bank in street clothes and silence, with a briefcase in his hand and a plan already in motion. And that might make this his most dangerous transformation yet. For years, Roman Reigns ruled through presence. Everything about him, his posture, his gear, his expression, was built to project dominance. When he walked into a ring, it was as champion. As the head of the table. As the final boss. That man was missing in Chicago. Instead, what we saw was leaner. More subdued. Stripped of the spectacle but not the power. Because when Reigns walked down that ramp, he wasn't hunting gold. He was passing it. And in that one act, silently handing the Money in the Bank briefcase to Jon Moxley, he turned from tribal chief to kingmaker. This wasn't Reigns stepping back into the spotlight. This was Reigns stepping into the shadows, but pulling every string. What made it so unsettling was the calm. There was no hesitation in his movement. No last-second moral conflict. No, will he or won't he, storytelling beat. He walked straight to the ring like a man finishing a sentence he'd started months ago. And Moxley understood it. No handshake. No nod. No dramatic stare down. Just a transfer. Reigns extended the briefcase like it was a weapon. Moxley took it like it was a mission. They didn't need to say anything because whatever they were doing wasn't for the audience. It was for them. The optics are chilling when you break it down. Roman Reigns, a man who once demanded everything be on his terms, gave the briefcase away. Not to a bloodline ally. Not to a rising talent. But to Jon Moxley. The one man WWE never expected to see inside their ropes again. This wasn't generosity. This was precision. Reigns chose Moxley not because of friendship, but because of fire. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a weapon. Let's not forget who Roman used to be. Before the tribal chief. Before the championships. He was the muscle of the Shield. The quiet one. The hammer. Seth was the architect. Moxley was the chaos. Reigns was the executioner. That version of Roman doesn't talk. He acts. And that's exactly who showed up. It's been over a year since Roman last appeared on WWE television. Following his monumental title run and eventual loss, he disappeared with no timetable. Rumors swirled, burnout, creative frustration, contract renegotiation. What we now know is that he wasn't just resting. He was planning. The briefcase in his hand wasn't a relic from his past. It was leverage. A ticket back into the narrative without needing to wrestle, fight, or even raise his voice. He walked in with control and walked out with chaos in his wake. It's also worth examining how he got that briefcase. There was no storyline build-up. No announced match. No surprise win earlier in the show. The briefcase just appeared with him. And that makes it even more unsettling. If Reigns didn't win it, how did he get it? Did he strike a deal with management behind the scenes? Was there an off-camera match or a loophole no one saw coming? Or did he just take it? Because who's going to tell Roman Reigns no? That question remains unanswered, and that ambiguity is part of the brilliance. It sends a message: Reigns doesn't need the system to win. He just needs access. The narrative coming out of Money in the Bank is that Moxley took the title. But if you look closer, Roman took the power. He didn't cash in. He didn't pin anyone. He didn't cut a promo. He made a move that real power players make. He gave someone else the spotlight, knowing it would buy him influence in the shadows. It's also a direct strike at Seth Rollins. Think about it. Rollins has spent the last year shaping WWE into his image. Headlining events. Setting the tone backstage. Aligning with Paul Heyman. Becoming the unofficial face of the new regime. Roman didn't return to challenge that. He returned to erase it. By giving Moxley the briefcase and pointing him at Rollins, Reigns didn't just screw over his old teammate. He dismantled a legacy Rollins had built meticulously for over a year. And he did it with a shrug. The most haunting part of all of this? Roman never raised his voice. Never justified his actions. Never explained. He just moved. And that's what separates this version of Reigns from any iteration before. This isn't a man trying to prove himself. This isn't a champion defending a dynasty. This is a strategist. A general who's already thought 5 moves ahead and doesn't care who gets credit for the win. When Reigns walked out of the arena that night with Moxley beside him, neither man spoke to press. WWE officials were reportedly instructed not to approach them. Security flanked them all the way to their vehicles. They weren't avoiding confrontation. They were avoiding conversation. Because they said everything they needed to say in action. Roman Reigns didn't come back to rule. He came back to rearrange the battlefield. And now, no one knows who's next, or worse, if anyone was ever safe. There was no announcement. No countdown. No finger point. No ref holding up a contract. Just Jon Moxley standing in a WWE ring with a briefcase in one hand and destruction all around him. The bell rang. And in that moment, the landscape of WWE was altered with a single decision. Jon Moxley had just cashed in Money in the Bank. It didn't matter that he wasn't officially in the match. It didn't matter that the briefcase wasn't his to begin with. Rules bent the moment Roman Reigns handed it to him. The referee looked unsure, but he called for the bell, because what else do you do when a storm walks in with the law in his hand? What followed was not a match. It was a hit. Seth Rollins had barely recovered from the chair shot Moxley delivered minutes earlier. He was crawling, bleeding from the mouth, eyes wide and confused. Bron Breakker wasn't moving. Still out from the paradigm shift. Moxley didn't pace. He didn't look around for approval. He dragged Rollins by the hair into the middle of the ring. Then lifted him into the air, no trash talk, no emotion. Paradigm shift. Boom. Rollins' body hit the mat like a sack of bricks. The sound was dull and sickening, like meat slamming into canvas. The ref slid down. 1, 2, 3. No kick out. No shoulder twitch. No drama. Just silence. Then chaos. The crowd erupted, but it wasn't joy. It wasn't even anger. It was confusion laced with awe. Like they weren't sure whether to cheer for the spectacle or boo the violation. Moxley stood, chest heaving, hair soaked, eyes burning 1,000 yards into nowhere. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even react. He just grabbed the title from the referee, stared at it, and let it hang limp in his hand. There was no coronation. No pyro. No victory lap. Because this wasn't a celebration. It was a statement. And the statement was brutal in its simplicity: I can still do this. I never needed your permission. And I'm taking what I want. The camera cut to Seth Rollins, laid out flat in the center of the ring. Face to the ceiling. Not blinking. No heroic push-up to regain dignity. No slow nod of defiance. Just stunned defeat. And that made the moment hit harder. Because Rollins wasn't beaten in a 5-star war. He wasn't bested in a technical showcase. He was jumped. Flattened. Erased. This was not a match result. This was an ambush caught on tape. Bron Breakker, who had taken Moxley's DDT earlier, rolled over near the ropes. Barely conscious. He reached toward the ropes and fell back down. Another victim. Another witness. Everyone else in the building was just trying to catch up. Even the commentary team didn't know how to respond. Kevin Patrick stumbled through his headset. This isn't supposed to be happening. Corey Graves went dead quiet. Michael Cole's voice cracked as he muttered, that's not even his contract, but it didn't matter. Because in wrestling, perception becomes reality the second the referee counts 3. Moxley was now the undisputed champion. And nobody could explain how or why. The question is, why did it hit so hard? Because Moxley didn't ask for this opportunity. He took it. And he didn't take it to prove a point about competition or titles. He took it because it was there. Because Rollins had it. Because Roman wanted him to. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. Reclamation of space. Of presence. Of relevance. And of control. Let's not forget, Moxley didn't leave WWE quietly. He walked away in 2019 with rage in his rearview. He called the creative soulless. He called the promos garbage. He wanted to wrestle his way, speak his truth, and bleed without limits. Now, in 2025, he returned not to be understood, but to prove that nothing had changed. He still doesn't play by the rules. He still doesn't care about storylines. And when given a platform, he'll destroy everything scripted and spit out something real. The belt in his hand wasn't validation. It was a weapon. One that reminded WWE, and every fan watching, that the system they rely on is fragile. That's what made the moment so terrifying. And unforgettable. Because it wasn't just a shocking win. It was a shattering of the rules. And Jon Moxley now stood as champion of a company he had buried 6 feet deep only a few years ago. He didn't demand it. He didn't deserve it. He just made it real. As soon as the broadcast ended, reality set in. WWE's cameras cut to black with Jon Moxley still standing in the ring. But backstage? That's where the real show began. There was no music playing. No celebration waiting for the new champion behind the curtain. What waited was panic. According to multiple sources, the production team was blindsided. The closing segment had been marked as final sequence, Rollins' victory celebration or twist tease. Nothing in the notes referenced Moxley. Nothing in the internal rundown sheet showed Roman Reigns appearing. There were no graphics cued, no camera crew assigned to a return shot. The truck was flying blind. As soon as Moxley exited through the side ramp, security scrambled. Not to remove him, but to surround him. Footage leaked hours later from a backstage cell phone showing Reigns and Moxley walking through the gorilla position, flanked by at least 6 security staff. Neither man looked at anyone. Neither man responded to questions. They moved quickly, quietly, like a military extraction. They didn't go to the locker rooms. They walked straight to the parking lot. No interviews. No statements. Roman slid into the back of a black SUV. Moxley got in behind him. The vehicle pulled away before producers could even locate a press rep. Inside sources reported that Triple H was not seen at Gorilla when it happened. One anonymous agent said, nobody knew what was real and what was planned. Phones were lighting up like Christmas trees. Some thought it was a legit hijacking. In the locker room, the mood was different. Shell-shocked. Some talent reportedly thought it was a work until they saw Seth Rollins return through the curtain. Drenched in sweat, bruised, and furious, Rollins burst through the gorilla area and started yelling at officials. He wasn't performing. He was exploding. Eyewitnesses described him as white-hot with rage. He was seen throwing a monitor, screaming at 2 road agents, and demanding answers. At one point, he shouted, "Who signed off on this?" before storming out of view. Medical staff tried to evaluate him. He refused. Security asked him to calm down. He didn't. He left the arena without speaking to the press, without showering, and without looking anyone in the eye. This wasn't storyline aftermath. This was real. Rollins had just lost the most protected prize in WWE to a man who wasn't supposed to be in the building. And no one could give him a straight answer. Other superstars were left confused. One developmental talent was overheard asking, "Is Moxley even under contract?" Another said, "What the hell happens tomorrow?" There was no press release from WWE that night. No tweet. No Instagram story. Just silence. Which made the tension worse. Because if this was part of a grand plan, it was the best kept secret in the company's modern history. And if it wasn't? Then WWE had just been hijacked on live television. Theories started forming before the night ended. One backstage producer speculated that this was Roman's leverage. That during his extended hiatus, Reigns had negotiated creative freedom and used it to engineer Moxley's one-night return. Another floated the idea that it was Triple H's attempt to inject volatility into a product many considered too safe. But none of it was confirmed. And the silence from WWE executives only made the theories spiral further. By the following morning, internal memos had been sent to staff instructing them not to discuss the main event publicly until further notice. Social media teams were ordered to post only generic MITB highlights, no mention of the cash-in, no photos of Moxley with the belt, no backstage interviews. The company was in lockdown mode. Meanwhile, the outside world was erupting. #Moxley Returns was trending in over a dozen countries. News outlets from ESPN to TMZ were scrambling for statements. AEW refused to comment. WWE remained quiet. It was chaos, and it was working. Because whether it was planned or not, it was undeniable, WWE hadn't felt this unpredictable in years. And the ripple effect was just beginning. By midnight, Money in the Bank had already been clipped, re-uploaded, remixed, subtitled, and dissected across every major social media platform. The footage of Jon Moxley hitting the ring, swinging a chair like a guillotine, and Roman Reigns handing him the briefcase had over 14.3 million views across Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube before the sun came up. And still, no official word. That silence became fuel. Within an hour of the PPV ending, Reddit's r/squared circle exploded. A single thread titled "Wait, did Moxley just steal the title?" had over 18,000 upvotes and nearly 4,000 comments in the first 4 hours. Conspiracy theories, breakdowns, fan theories, it was digital fire. Speculation became the new main event. And there wasn't one theory. There were dozens. This was the most widely accepted early theory. According to fans and a few independent wrestling bloggers, Roman Reigns had quietly negotiated his return months ago, but demanded creative control over his next arc. Part of that control allegedly included choosing his opponent, match style, and whether or not to align with former allies. If that's true, then Moxley wasn't just a surprise, he was a pawn in a longer playbook. But others saw it differently. Hardcore fans began cross-referencing Moxley's AEW appearances and noticed something curious: he hadn't wrestled on Dynamite in nearly 7 weeks. The last public promo he gave was vague, mentioning needing to step away and reevaluate. Some now believe AEW may have granted him a special one-night appearance clause, possibly as part of an unpublicized handshake agreement between Tony Khan and WWE. One independent wrestling journalist tweeted, "If you think Tony Khan didn't know, you're dreaming. Moxley doesn't do anything without purpose." This was coordinated. That tweet racked up 2.3 million views. But others weren't buying it. Some believed this was a full-blown relaunch of The Shield, albeit in a darker, more chaotic form. The theory goes, Reigns and Moxley have reunited not out of loyalty, but vengeance, targeting the man they believe ruined the Shield legacy first, Seth Rollins. In this narrative, the briefcase handoff was symbolic. Reigns was never supposed to reclaim the title, he wanted to give it to the only man he trusted to destroy the system from within. Not an alliance. A reckoning. The tweets came fast: "This isn't the Shield. This is the Purge. Roman's the strategist. Mox is the chaos. Seth's the sacrifice." Another tweet that went viral: "The Shield is dead. This is something else. Something colder." This one gained traction on fan forums and alt-wrestling subreddits. It's the theory that Reigns and Moxley acted without WWE's blessing, that they pulled off a real-time hijacking of the PPV, exploiting either a contract loophole or production vulnerability. This theory is supported by WWE's real-time silence. The fact that commentators were visibly confused, the production team had no graphics ready, and that Moxley and Reigns were escorted out under security instead of celebrated, none of it lines up with typical WWE protocol for major angles. One Reddit user wrote, "You don't escort your new champ out of the building with 6 security guards unless something went wrong." They didn't celebrate. They evacuated. Of course, others say that's exactly what WWE wants us to think. Which brings us to the fifth, and perhaps most meta theory. The most advanced theory suggests WWE orchestrated the entire event as a calculated risk. That they deliberately created chaos, not just on screen, but off screen, to recapture fan engagement through real confusion. This line of thinking posits that everyone involved, from Rollins to AEW, is in on it. That Moxley's return was pre-negotiated under a high-level agreement, and WWE staff were kept in the dark to create authentic chaos. In short, the most real-looking work in company history. Fans pointed to parallels with CM Punk's infamous pipe bomb promo, the Nexus debut, or Brian Pillman's loose cannon arc in the 90s. But this? This was on another level. No promo. No foreshadowing. Just a chair shot and a title change that felt more like a mutiny than a moment. As the theories spiraled, so did the reaction videos. YouTube exploded. Influencers across the community dropped emergency live streams. Titles like "Moxley just hijacked WWE, Roman's plan all along," and "Is this the end of Rollins?" dominated trending tabs. One video, simply titled "What the hell just happened?" racked up over 3.5 million views in under 12 hours. Some fans were ecstatic. "I haven't felt this alive watching wrestling since the Attitude Era," one user wrote. Others were pissed. "This is what happens when you stop protecting your belts. You turn the show into a circus," tweeted a former WWE creative writer. But no one was bored. Even mainstream outlets started covering it. ESPN ran a segment the next morning on Get Up, teasing, "Did Jon Moxley just change the game?" Rolling Stone's pop culture desk ran a feature, "Return of the Mad King, Why Moxley's WWE Chaos is a Cultural Event." Everyone had a theory. No one had confirmation. And that's exactly why it worked. Because the most powerful weapon in wrestling isn't a finisher. It's uncertainty. And now, the entire industry was sitting in it.